Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to today's stream. My name is Ariana. I am the co director of the Consent Academy, an international nonprofit dedicated to teaching about consent and all of its complexity and potential. And I'm very excited to be here today. I procrastinated on getting ready a little bit too long, so I may need to take a break at one point to go get something to drink. Hello to Tibron. Um, but I had, before I left on my break, prepared all the materials for today's Tuesday stream, so I would come in ready. Hi, Aradin. But yes, we're going to talk about lots of stuff today. Okay. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Whatever you're up to, wherever you are, I hope it's going well, and I'm just excited that I get to hang out with you. All right. So, I got a meme. Only one meme today, then 3 video recommendations that'll be quick. Then we're going to read some more about friendship stuff, and then we're going to play Stardew Valley. So it should be pretty fun. So starting with the meme, it is a tweet. So I guess it's really not a meme, but whatever. A tweet from @Jared McKenna, and it says, observing humans under capitalism and concluding it's only in our nature to be greedy is like observing humans underwater and concluding it's only in our nature to drown, which is a quote from Mark Fisher. I don't actually know who Mark Fisher is off the top of my head. I don't know if they're like horrible and problematic, but this quote I do actually think is really good because sometimes I see both online in general and even in the chat here and in our discussions, but also just like in my day-to-day life, a certain type of fatalism about, well, of course things are bad because people are like this. And even a tendency to maybe jump to conclusions about certain situations and attribute automatically like bad intentions or negative character traits to a random individual. Maybe someone we know, maybe someone we don't know, because there's a kind of fatalism about the world. And the thing is, though, one, I think that if you actually, thank you to Tibron for the little information. You say, from a quick web search, Mark Fisher is the author of the book Capitalist Realism. I will definitely check that book out. If you added up all the experiences you have in your day-to-day life across your lifespan and looked at how many of them did people behave kindly to you or generously or nicely or even just like treat you with a baseline of respect, that is likely to be higher than the number of times that you were treated like really terribly. And obviously, this is going to have a ton of variance from person to person, but generally speaking, even in just like the most selfish interpretation of this, the average person does not go around drop kicking puppies and spitting in babies' faces and harassing everybody that they see because they would very quickly be in a very, very bad position in life. You're right, Krellin. Brains don't care about quantity. However, it still can be a helpful exercise to give ourselves this, because if we find ourselves having thoughts that are very fatalistic and very negative about the world, it's a common thing in a lot of the workbooks for different types of therapies, including cognitive processing therapy for PTSD, to look at, am I confusing my prediction about the world with something that is possible versus something that is likely? And so we can have a tendency to overassume negative things are likely rather than just negative things are possible. So going back, like there's a lot of variation that can happen in an individual's life for sure. But if many people just walked around just being like constantly hostile and threatening and negative, pretty quickly they end up in a pretty shit position in their life. And even with people who are, say, very abusive, the only way someone gets away with that kind of behavior, especially once it's escalated to its more extreme forms is because they know when to dial it in and when to let it flow. Because if they just acted that way all the time in front of people, they would get more pushback most likely, and or lose access to resources, or people would lose respect for them. So people have a tendency to not really display that kind of behavior 24/7. Similarly, if an abuser were like only ever unkind to the people they have power over, a lot of the time those people would figure out what was happening sooner and seek to leave sooner, versus the very particular ways, the manipulation that a lot of abusers do. Sorry, I'm very fidgety today. It's the longevity of those unsupportive relationships is greatly buoyed by the fact that abusers can also be incredibly kind and incredibly charming. Okay, so just like that's some like number, just like thinking about it in that way. And even just like at the most selfish thing, most people have selfish things. They don't have to be selfish, but we could say like, if we imagine everybody's selfish, there still is motivation to be kind and giving to other people. Now, if that's the first step you need, you can take that step. But the next step you should get to is recognition that most people aren't that selfish. Most people are too busy just trying to like figure out what's happening and like what they need to be doing next, and kind of keeping track of all the logistics of their life, to be sort of selfish in like a capital S kind of like innate character trait kind of way. People can behave selfishly more in some contexts than others. We all are capable of that, but it depends. A lot of character traits are also really context dependent. So that being is what I want to kind of come to is this idea of, if we are, say, even looking at a post like, am I the asshole, or relationship advice, it's, I think, often easier to start by assuming everybody in this situation behaved in good faith, at least to some degree. And everybody in this situation thinks that what they're doing is correct. The people who post who are like obviously assholes would not come and post these things if they did not believe on some level that what they were doing was actually the correct behavior. And it's, I think, makes analysis harder if we start by assuming that they believe that behavior is correct because they're a horrible sociopath or narcissist or whatever, when it's much more likely that they just don't realize the effect that their behavior has. Or maybe someone has told them, but it hasn't sunken in yet, or they don't really understand it. There are exceptions, of course. There's limitations to this. But I think that it's really easy for us to get very fatalistic. Also about like social change, because we just think, well, everybody is just A, B, and C, and therefore we're never going to make the world a better place. I kind of call BS on that. I think that there's a lot that goes into active corporations, billionaires, these big astroturfing think tanks. And if you don't know what astroturfing is, it's like fake grassroots effort. So it's like a grassroots effort to like, make sure there's soda in every school vending machine versus like water or tea or juice or whatever. That is from like Moms for Choice, but Moms for Choice isn't actually a real thing. It was like this fake lobbying group created by some think tanks or whatever. And then real people get influenced by the perception that there's like thousands of moms out there who want their kids to be able to choose to drink soda all day. This kind of thing actually happens a lot. Like, I made that one up off the top of my head, but I'm like 99% sure that a specific scenario has actually happened. But anyway, and it's probably, a think tank mostly funded by like one of the big soda companies or something, especially whenever there's like a push to limit developing brains' access to addictive substances, which most sugary things are addictive. Okay, so there wouldn't be so many of these organizations and so much funding all around us all the time, aiming to muddy the water and to make sure we don't organize, whether it's union busting or just like, you know, the fear, misinformation, doubt, and uncertainty that flood the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But also, I want to put misinformation in there. There would not be all of these efforts to make it harder for us to create positive change if it was just so in our nature to not want to create these changes. Does that make sense? I hope that that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say here is it's okay to be optimistic and to assume the best in other people and to assume that most of the things that make people negative rather than an individual, exactly, a million moms or something, Jakey is exactly a great one, are largely systemic issues that, when overcome, could make the whole thing a lot better. Hey, Valium, I assume that's how to say your name. You said blaming greed for wealth inequality is implying that capitalism without greed wouldn't be causing wealth inequality, which is a failure to understand capitalism itself. Yeah, sure. This isn't saying that greed is what makes capitalism bad. If I understand you correctly, because I agree with you, this is saying that if you look at people around you and see people behaving in ways that are greedy, everyone's just worried about, making as much money as possible, trying to get ahead, like people really like praise the sort of survivorship bias of the people who crawl out of poverty and into like extreme wealth and whatever. And while those people are being very greedy and hoarding massive amounts of wealth and whatever. But it would be really easy to come to the conclusion that it is natural or it is the default for human beings to act in competition with each other in this way, to hoard wealth and resources and to be greedy, versus the fact that we are susceptible to these behaviors. And the susceptibility gets highly influenced under certain contexts. So I also agree with what you're saying, Krellin, which is that like certain aspects of capitalism absolutely depend upon greed, but it's not necessarily greed in the visceral sense the way we think about it. It's when we often how we imagine it, but I think it's greed that comes from like diffusion of responsibility, where it's really easy for us to not even recognize the negative impact that comes from elite overconsumption or hoarding of resources. So yeah. Aradin, you added, globalization is a way of trying to make your point seem to have more support behind it than just you. Yeah, like generalizing and saying like everybody thinks this or whatever is, yeah, that's definitely a rhetorical tactic. And Krellin, again, you said capitalism wouldn't exist without greed. Capitalism is a system based upon greed. And, I think that there are also, though, going to be a lot of people who their motivation from the outside can seem like it's greed, but for them, it's just like, well, I have to do what I have to do to like pay the bills or make sure my family is in a good position. And then they behave in ways that seem sociopathic because it's basically what I'm trying to pull from here is that a lot of character traits and a lot of behaviors are context dependent. I'm pulling from the idea of field theory, which is that we have essentially different identities and modalities of behavior depending on context that we are in. And like a great example of this is like how you present yourself at work versus how you present yourself with like your old friends versus how you present yourself at like, Rammstein concert versus something like a Taylor Swift concert. Those are all you, but they're you under different fields. I do agree with you. Krellin, the system itself is greedy. But the point coming back here to this original tweet is that it's really easy to get fatalistic about things and just think that like nothing is possible to be better because we got to this position because of something essential in human nature. And my sort of feeling is that at its core, human nature is plastic. It is something that is has no essential sort of quality to it, that we're all equally capable of being, virtuous or not, and causing harm and helping people. And it depends on both individual choices, but also contexts and systemic issues. And that I don't like to take like a Whiggish view of philosophy or history and believe that like the current state that we're in is inevitable and was inevitable, because I think that there's a lot that can change. But that being said, simultaneously, and it's going to come to the next point, I really want to recommend this video. There is a pretty popular sciencey YouTube channel called Kurzgesagt, which means like in a nutshell, or like said shortly in German. And they put out a lot of genuinely bullshit videos. This was something that I had sort of started to notice a while ago, and I stopped watching that channel. And then I just saw this video by this YouTuber called The Hated One. I don't know much about this YouTuber. Most of this videos seem to be about data security and information privacy. But this video is really good and really talks about a lot of conflicts of interests and where this channel gets its funding from. And it's mostly from billionaires who get this channel to put out either like really scary media about certain like doomsday things or like diseases or whatever, to then encourage you to believe that the, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is going to like save us because they're working on these problems or whatever. Or be sort of like techno hope porn, which is just like, we don't have to actually fight climate change because technology is going to come in and make it better, while we continue to invest in complete loser technologies like clean coal and carbon capture that end up taking so many more resources and energy than would be necessary if we just, used algae and planted trees and reduced our emissions in ways we already know how to. It's like we've talked about a lot on this stream. We already have the technology to save ourselves. It's just we don't have the political will. And too many billionaires have too much power in lobbying and choosing funding sources and targets. And therefore, we're just wasting so much time. So I really, really want to recommend this video, because I think that this is something, this sort of critical thinking. I'm glad you like this channel, Valium. The critical thinking that this video encourages, and the sort of taking everything with a grain of salt, which includes, I do want to encourage you to take everything I say with a grain of salt. I have some degrees and background that give me authority in some of the things that I'm saying. And I have, my experience, years of experience as like a grassroots activist and organizer and, all of these things that I've done. However, even with all of that, I am still only one person, and therefore I have biases and I have things. Oh, we met our follower goal. Woohoo! So I'm officially going to say that we're going to do a watch party in the very near future. And by the near future, I mean, like, I got to look at the schedule, but hopefully not this weekend, but the weekend after, on our Discord, because I've been wanting to do that. And now I have a good reason to. Okay. I'm all over the place today. But the point, getting back to, is that I am just one person. I have my own biases. I have the things that I feel are trustworthy sources, and even peer-reviewed journals. While I recommend like peer-reviewed things over like blogs and stuff, generally speaking, that doesn't mean that that's perfect as well. And peer review is actually a pretty young experiment within the scientific world. And there was just this really big, very controversial article that was about how like peer review is like a failed experiment in the world of science. I know this because my husband's the physicist and I'm biophysicist. You're going to get your blog peer reviewed. Well, if we all review each other, then we've been reviewed by our peers. But yes, don't just trust the things I say because I've said them. Actually engage with the sources that I share. And I do always try to cite my sources because I think that it's really, really easy, especially about some bigger things, to like the source or have like nebulous good feelings about a source, or like the connection that we have through, especially the people who knew me on Geek Space. It would be really easy for people to just trust me when they maybe shouldn't. However, I do my best to do my due diligence. Okay, watch this video, do it. Next thing I want to show you, this one here also is really good. I like Climate Town a lot. I also want to recommend this channel. And this one talks a lot about the astroturfing that I mentioned, but also the importance of being civilly engaged. But the two videos I think really go together in a very important way, because it's important for us to actually be engaged in local politics and things like city council meetings, like really just like going to your local town or city council meetings will make such a big difference, because a lot of the time the only people who are there are like nobody or just, octogenarians that are angry because too many brown people have moved to the neighborhood. And I have seen this many times in person. I really want to recommend going there and making your voice heard, because you'll have so much more power there than a lot of the times even than in voting, because you can put pressure on these people individually by just showing up regularly. And it's tough when we have jobs and we can't always be there, but there are oftentimes like town halls that are in the evening, or city council meetings that might be later. I just really recommend it. But the caveat to that is it's hard to know who to trust to get information to help inform our opinions when there's so much bullshit propaganda out there, like propaganda from billionaires. And then the last video I want to recommend is this one. It's also from the Hated One, and it's about how the CIA spreads dangerous propaganda on YouTube. Now, I know this is going to seem like conspiracy theory stuff, and if you've ever watched my lecture on how to change someone's mind, like how to have like a cross-political, cross-cultural discussion without it turning into an argument, is I think what the actual title is. I talk about how conspiracy theories are a tough one, because a lot of conspiracy theories there are many conspiracy theories, though it is not a large percentage of all total conspiracy theories, but there are many conspiracy theories that are not actually nonsense, like, things that the CIA has actually admitted to doing, and how it's pretty standard, for example, for every government to have plans, like contingency plans for how to assassinate the world leaders of every other country. Like that's a pretty normal thing. So like our government does have plans and has assassinated American citizens for political expediency, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, though, there are a lot of like ex-CIA agents that'll come on to these YouTube channels or have their own, and they like use their time in the CIA as like exactly Martin Luther King. There have been Fred Hampton. A lot of these just killed a lot of our own citizens because they were speaking truth to power or trying to challenge the status quo. Okay, so these ex-CIA agents, I think that this top comment here really says it, is There's no such thing as a former CIA agent. I mean, really, because at the very least, and the least sort of conspiracy theory, spending that much time in a job that encourages you to view people in the ways in which you have to in order to do that job, which is with suspicion, thinking that the ends justify the means for a lot of things, etc., is going to have an effect on you. The other thing is, I highly doubt that anyone who leaves the CIA does not have a lot hanging over their head with how much the CIA is going to know about them to blackmail them for the rest of their lives into towing a very particular line. But a lot of them also come out as oh, I am a body language expert. I'm thinking of the YouTube guy, Joe Navarro, who's trying to say all the time, here's how to spot a liar. And it's all these people who can do body language reading and stuff, it's literally bullshit. Just gonna leave it there. But that ends up being propaganda because it means that he's putting forth the idea that law enforcement has these special matrix level, super brain analysis skills to catch the bad guys, when the only tactics that actually tend to work is one getting actual evidence or allowing a person who committed a crime to just talk for long enough, because they will usually give themselves away. You don't need to see that they touch their nose in this way. You just let them talk and they will usually implicate themselves. And then when it comes to interpersonal, is this person lying to me? It's how well do you know the person? Compare them to their baseline. Do they act a certain way when they're lying? Do they get really evasive or start laughing a lot? Anyway, these are the 3 YouTube videos I want to recommend. Okay. I did this with some level of speed, so I'm proud of myself. Okay, so here's an article I want to read. If this is the first time you're watching this channel or you haven't watched in a while, don't worry. We're going to cover some things with some context that I'm going to give. So we have, over the series of this YouTube, talked a lot about infrastructure and city planning and how those are consent issues. We've talked a lot about things like community autonomy, what is community and individual resilience. We've also talked about some historical things, we read aspects of the book Secular Cycles. We also read part of the book Surviving the Future and looked at historical civilization decline and what that can tell us about how to build a more resilient future for ourselves. And we've also looked at things like autonomy in aging and how that's a consent issue for all of us. And then also looking at friendship and how it relates to all these things. And we've recently been talking a lot about both pure processes of friendship, but also how infrastructure and social constraints affect how many friends we actually have and why so many of us have no friends and are chronically lonely. And this is a continuation of this intellectual lineage that we have been building together. So I like this article. This is from 2019. It's on Wired, and it's called In New York, Friendships Run Along Subway Lines. And then the subtitle is, a study finds New Yorkers are most likely to be Facebook friends if they live along the same subway line. So the important caveat here is Facebook friend does not necessarily correlate to actual levels of friendship. There are tons of people that I'm friends with on Facebook because it would have been awkward to tell them no. And I just don't follow them or want to see their stuff because I don't vibe with them. However, this does give us some data on social connections. And let's read more. Okay. Stop me if you've heard this one before. You meet someone great. The conversation is dazzling. The interests are mutual. The personalities click. It would be cool to hang out or to hang out again. Then the hammer drops. You live where? The highway goes nowhere near that place, or you'd have to transfer subways 3 times. And thus something beautiful dies before it even begins. If you've made similar cold-hearted friendship decisions, new research suggests you are not alone. So this is one of those things where This is assuming that you live in a place with enough public transit. You said stop, Krellen? I don't know. Wait, what's the stop about? Okay. Cheeky. Okay. So, this is assuming you live in a place that has public transit. You might not, but we're going to end up making similar decisions. You know, statistically, you're a lot more likely to get married to somebody, for example, who lives within a certain geographic distance from you. It's not necessarily from your hometown. That was kind of like an older metric that they used to use before capitalism started really demanding that we all move really far away for opportunities, or just like the state of the economy, because in secular cycles that happened even when it wasn't capitalism. But yeah, moving far away from home for educational and economic opportunities, but also you make these kinds of decisions about how far you're going to drive to see somebody. It's one of the things that can make facilitating friendships outside of work really hard, because if you can meet at work, that's really great. But if you work in like a shitty ass office park where there's nothing for miles to do, there's no cool third place to go to. And if you don't know what a third place is, it is a place that is not the workplace nor the home, in which socializing is facilitated by the place that it is. So that would be things like, community centers, libraries, bars and restaurants and cafes, things like this. And the fewer of those you have access to, usually also the fewer friendships you're going to have. And the more expensive those things are, the fewer friendships you're likely to have. So if both you and your coworker friend have to commute like 45 minutes or an hour or more to get to the office, but they're in opposite directions from each other, that's going to really negatively impact how likely you're going to be able to develop that friendship outside of work. And this also means that if everybody can't easily meet up outside of work, it makes it a lot harder to unionize and to organize and to like present grievances and concerns together, even if you're not unionizing. It's a really good way to make sure we're all very disempowered. I'm sorry, Jakey, that your city does not have good public transit. It's no place in the world has enough public transit. Not even Vienna, Austria, where I live, that is got one of the best public transit systems in the world. It's still not enough. There are lots of places that are sort of like missing middles, that are not covered by services. The city does a pretty good job, but especially as you get further out into what is not rural, but satellite cities, it gets less and less good. Okay. A working paper. And here is the link to the paper. And this was published in 2019. So hopefully it's not a working paper anymore. It looks like it still is. Okay. Well, maybe they've updated it. Back to this. Published this month by the National Bureau of Economic Research finds that New Yorkers' social connections are driven less by physical distance than public transit infrastructure. In other words, you are where you subway. Jakey, if you get dual citizenship and move to Vienna, please let me know. We should hang out. But also just like, I want everybody to move to Vienna. It's one of the fastest growing cities in Europe. It's like it's already cool, but I know in like 10 years, it's going to be incredibly cool. So I'm very excited, and Charlie and I are hoping that we can stay here long term. In other words, you are where you subway. The paper, written by researchers from Princeton University, New York University, and Facebook, draws on anonymized and aggregated Facebook data from March 2018 from New York City area users who had enabled location history. The data is aggregated by zip code to preserve users' anonymity and excludes zip codes with fewer than 500 residents. In prior research, which looked at Facebook users across wider swaths of the country, the same team of social scientists found that, your social network is shaped by physical distance. The closer someone is, the more likely they are to be your Facebook friend, but the researchers were surprised to find that, in New York at least, transportation ease was an even stronger predictor of Facebook friendship than distance. Upping the distance between neighborhoods by 10% correlates with an almost 10% reduction in Facebook friendships, but upping the travel times by 10% leads to an almost 15% reduction. The relationship between travel time and likelihood of a Facebook connection held even after the economists controlled for factors known to spur friendships like income, educational level, and race. So what this is one of the most important aspects of this article, and what this is basically saying is like there are known factors that influence how likely you are to become friends with someone. You're more likely to become friends with someone who has a similar life circumstance to you. It's easier if you have a similar income level because then you can likely afford the same social activities. I talked a lot in the past about getting priced out of friendships in Seattle pretty regularly because there were a lot of people who worked in big tech and had tons of money, and I did not. I work in the nonprofit industry. I don't have a lot of money. And there were also, you're more likely to be friends with people who are of a similar educational level to you. Now, this is not to say that there's anything to do with like quality of the person or their intelligence or anything, but just that you're more likely to be in similar life circumstances that would facilitate friendship with someone who is at the same educational level of you. And race. I say this as a person who's mixed race. I have a lot of white friends, but there are a lot of white friends of mine that we will never become that more than a very low level of friend because they're just, if I went any further, it would get awkward real fast. And, or it's just like exhausting for me to spend a lot of time with them. And I know as a mixed race person that I can be similarly exhausting for POC because I am also half white. So I've got a lot of whiteness. And there are things that I can, cultural assumptions and cultural background. Anyway, it's just easier when there isn't sources of friction or tension and where the situation that your life is in facilitates friendship and exposure to each other, it's easier to become friends. However, this is one of the caveats about third places, is good third places, especially in human scale communities, i.e. what people would call walkable communities, where you actually have spaces within walking distance or, you don't need a car to get there and they're accessible. Third places like a pub or a bar facilitate friendships and acquaintances and like situational friendships that transcend these lines because, I live in, part of Vienna and there's a lot of subsidized housing. There's public housing right in the immediate area. There's like multiple public housing buildings right here. My building is rent controlled. There's a bunch of other rent controlled buildings nearby. And then there's also new buildings that are not rent controlled. And so there's going to be huge class differences, even just within, a 5-minute walk around us. And that means that I'm a lot more likely to experience exposure to people of different social and economic classes at my local pub here than I would in a part of the world that is more economically segregated. So that benefits all of us. Okay. Continuing, data from social media platforms like Facebook has given scientists unprecedented glimpses into human relationships and how they're formed, says Teresa Kuchler. So this is one of those things is like, I remember when I was an undergrad, because Facebook had been out for a few years, but like I'd never heard of it until college. And I didn't get one right away because it still was like invite only for a while, and then it wasn't, and I was just kind of like, social media, I got MySpace, what do I need that for? But yeah, I remember though in university there were people, this article is only a few years old, it's 2019 I think, that there was a lot of research being done on like sociology research, especially using Facebook, and I participated in several studies. And one of the ones that was really fun was about like Facebook stalking and like what would normally be socially transgressive behaviors that are facilitated and normalized by social media, like obsessively looking through all the pictures of a person and like figuring out who people are friends with and being able to know who someone is dating without them having to tell you or introduce them to you, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty fascinating. However, there is always inevitably caveats to any research that's done trying to extrapolate larger claims about like human behavior from something like Facebook, because there's an obvious selection bias there. You're only selecting people who use Facebook and also have their location data turned on. Yeah, Facebook actually is growing constantly. While a lot of young people don't use it anymore, like a lot of Gen Z doesn't use it, and a lot of younger millennials have really kind of abandoned it as a common platform. Older millennials, Gen X, boomers, their usage is actually growing pretty rapidly still around the world. Um, yeah. And this was also before like Zuckerberg renamed it Meta and like tried to make the metaverse a thing. Anyway, anyway. Um, okay, a co-author of the paper, an assistant professor of finance at NYU's Stern School of Business, who studies how people make economic decisions. Sure, most people aren't best friends with all their Facebook friends, but if we want to figure out what type of people you know and who you talk to and what areas of the country you have friends in, it's a good way to capture that, she says. Facebook has a unique treasure trove for this type of work. For now, the researchers haven't done work to suggest that the relationship between friendship and public transportation travel times holds for places outside of New York City. And it's true that in the US, New York is sui generis. No other city has such a well developed and widely used transit system, which is true. But researchers think it's possible that transportation determines friendships elsewhere, too. I think if you did this for a city that's not New York, public transit wouldn't matter, but road routings would matter. This is like what I mentioned earlier. Says Leah Brooks, an economist at George Washington University who has studied cities and transportation systems. It's very possible, she says, that two neighboring suburban areas might not have a lot of social connections if there's not an easy way to get between them. Brooks's own research has found that cities continue to be shaped by long ago public transit infrastructure, like streetcar lines. If you told me public transit matters to social connectedness in San Diego, I'd be really surprised, she says. The city doesn't have great transit. For now, the researchers on the New York study can't say that public transit creates social connectedness. If someone could randomly open a subway line for us, that would be fantastic, and we could answer that question. But the work points to something about transportation that gets forgotten. The way you get around determines a lot about your life. It shapes how you make money, how you spend money, what sorts of opportunities your kids might have. It also shapes your Facebook friendships and which of those might blossom into something more. So this is the other main takeaway from the article. So that one point about travel time, transit time affecting how likely you are to be friends with people. And then this section is that infrastructure around you affects every aspect of your life. The more transportation there is that that is not like a depreciating asset that is incredibly expensive, i.e. a car, the better off you tend to be. And so for example, in Seattle, there is public transit, there's a light rail, there's two streetcar lines that don't intersect with each other. There is a plan to connect them. I don't know how much has happened with that. There is a monorail that just connects like the Pacific Science Center to this suite of hotels, and there are buses. A lot of the time, it would be faster for me to walk to some place that would take me several hours to walk to than it would be for me to bus there. Because it was pretty easy to go north and south on bus lines, but going east and west at all was really, really difficult. And the buses were so infrequent that you could often have 45 minutes or more between bus times. So if you have to transfer, especially more than once, you're likely adding hours to your journey. And so even people who did not live that far away from me, who I had very similar circumstances to, so it should facilitate friendship, I basically could not become good friends with them because it was impossible for me to regularly see them. And that is an essential aspect of building friendship. There are these like cute statements about like you have to see somebody X number of times to become acquaintances, then to like pseudo friends, then to friends, then good friends, etc. And while the exact number is pretty wishy-washy, it is true that the more exposure you have to somebody, the more you're likely to become good friends with them. Similar to the idea of the mere exposure effect, which we've talked about before. I still have it up right here. We tend to develop preference for things merely because they are familiar to us. So the more time you see somebody, the more likely you are to like them. And vice versa, the more people see you, the more likely they are to like you. This is why it can be really a good idea if you're not like super feeling it to go to this party or whatever. Go for 15 minutes. Say hi to people. Then say like you're not feeling well, you've got a headache, whatever, or you're just not, you can be really honest too and just say like, I don't really have the energy to be here, but I wanted to come and say hi and thank you for inviting me to your party. That will make a big difference. Especially if you find yourself trying to talk yourself out of going to things using this like, I can predict the future kind of thoughts, like this is why it's going to suck. I don't really know anybody there, and like it's going to take too long to get there, and it's so cold outside, and I'm going to be miserable the whole way to getting there, and then it's going to be noisy, and everyone's going to be drunk, and someone's going to spill their drink on me. Like if you start doing that, you're talking yourself out of going. Say to yourself, I can go to this thing for 15 minutes. I can do that. And just go for 15 minutes. Say hello to the people who you're trying to develop friendships with or you want to maintain a friendship with, and then peace out. And maybe you stop by a cool bookstore on the way home and get yourself a new graphic novel or something. Or like, you know, you buy yourself some chocolates or some flowers to like treat yourself. Especially if you get those like, you know, really cheap tulips or something. Just to say like, good job me, I like did it, I went out, you know, celebrate your effort a little bit. But exposing yourself a little bit at that party will make people like you more. You will be more familiar to them and it will help. This is also one of the things that things like Facebook do facilitate because people see your posts and they see pictures of your life. I've watched this sometimes to like great astonishment. Like people will just post these things that seem so like annoyingly obvious to me, where like they're clearly trying to present some persona of being like, look at how spiritual and deep I am and blah blah blah. And I'm like, I'm literally an ordained Buddhist monk. And I like years after my ordination, just recently changed my profile picture to a picture of me in monk robes, and that's it. I have not, like, I don't go on there trying to build this persona, and people will I'll interact with people who are like, oh, this person is like so deep and so spiritual, and so like I really trust them, and I will feel like things that they do and say are really sort of ethically dubious if you're going to be doing like spiritual guidance for other people, but just by presenting themselves, their profile. Again, I recommend that book, You and Your Profile, Authenticity After Profilicity. I've been reading it. It's been fun. And yeah, it really works. And I'm not like organized enough to like cohesively present any kind of persona on the internet. And I'm deeply private about a lot of things. Like my being Buddhist monk and like what all that entails, because a lot of people have a lot of really weird assumptions about Buddhism, or think that I must be insane because who goes and gets ordained and whatever, whatever. But yeah, you can really create a persona online that people will believe to be true. And the more people are exposed to you, the better, the more likely they are to like you. So that was a tangent about my like annoyance with people who just, I just see people take these like incredibly staged pictures that they're like, oh, someone, there's just always someone around catching me like candid photos where I just look so beautiful and I'm like perfectly lit and like, don't I look playful? And I'm just like, one, the number of filters on this picture makes you look bizarre. Like your body does not look like a human body looks anymore. And like the whites of nobody's eyes are that white. But then like also no one just has like a fleet of like adoring fans who are just always there to like take the beautiful candid photos of you just like laughing perfectly. Like that's a fucking staged picture. Anyway, people can do what they want and more power to them. And like if you feel the need inside yourself to cultivate this, I might recommend like investigating where that's coming from and are there like wounds inside of yourself you can heal. But sure. Anyway, anyway, tangent over. Uh, Go to the party, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, set a timer, just do it, say hi to people, check in with some people, then get out of there. And that's it. And that will help. I promise you that will help. Because the other problem is if people invite you to a bunch of things and you never come, eventually the invitations are going to stop coming. There are things you can do, as I've mentioned before on past streams. You can let people know, hey, like my depression is really getting to me right now, and I'm not going to be able to come to this. And I know I've said no to a bunch of other events, but like, please don't stop inviting me because I do really want to be included. And once I get out of this particular episode of depression, I'll be back. Like, that's a perfectly reasonable thing. And people who are not psycho assholes will be, pleased at your self-awareness and candor and the fact that you took the time to reach out to them and tell them this. Continuing, I recommend reading about the mere exposure effect and how you can use it to your benefit more. I agree, Valium, to an extent we all show what you said, to an extent we all show of ourselves to others. Okay, sorry, no, to an extent, all we show of ourselves to others is a persona, but on the internet, it's definitely multiplied tenfold. And I mean, this comes back to part of my philosophy of identity, which is that we only know what we are in comparison to other things. Like we know what we are when we see what we are not a lot of the time. And that if you just like existed purely in a vacuum with no outside social influences around you, I don't think there would be some personality, of course, because a personality is going to develop. But we are constantly being influenced by people around us and also like trying to self-create. Anyway, this is also why you're allowed to play with your identity more than a lot of us do. Okay, this article was good. Public transport is a consent issue. It's an autonomy issue, autonomy being the foundation of consent. And it's something we should all care about. This other article is, no, that's the source. This is another one. This is just another article that talks about this that I want to recommend. And it's looking at a different city, one in Kazakhstan, and looking at how bus routes and urban mobility affect social life. And I recommend reading it because it's also got some interesting things to say. Wow, that's really bright. I'm going to turn my brightness down. So this one is something I just want to come back to for a minute. and look at the 6 stages of friendship to just think about this a bit and review a little bit. I can also share this with you all. I don't know if this link will work. But if it does, cool. And so we have 1, role limited interaction. These are the first encounters we have with new friends. In this stage, we tend to follow standard social rules, including being careful about what we disclose to a new friend. I'm terrible about that because I'm an open book. And so I will just tell anybody anything about me, pretty much, except for a couple of things that I'm like always private about. And then if I do tell people about those things, I'll probably tell it with a lot of sarcasm because I'm still an open book. But this is also one of those things that comes into play for consent, which is that we all have these sort of like default consent frameworks that we walk around with in our minds about like what is and isn't normal or acceptable to do with someone we've just met. And as we build a friendship, we start to update our consent framework for that individual. Does this person like hugs? How close do I like to stand to this person, or this person like to stand to me? What are topics that we seem to feel comfortable going to with each other? And what are ones that we don't? And as I get to know people, because I'm a really open person, I try to be really careful to not just like assume other people are going to be as open. And so before I want to ask really personal questions of someone I don't know very well, I always ask for permission first. I always say, like, is it okay if I ask you a personal question? And usually I'll give them an indication of, generally speaking, what it's about. Is it okay if I ask you a personal question about your religion or, your relationship to your parents because something you said made me curious? And then I do respect the answer that they give. And I try to be very gentle. Okay, 2, friendly relations. This is the second stage of a friendship where you discover what common grounds and interests exist between you and the new friend. This is something that is really, these 1 and 2 are things that are really possible pretty readily a lot of the time at third places. It depends on like the local culture, how standoffish people are, etc. And how open people are. But this is something that these 2 are really possible to develop in third places. And so if you don't have a lot of friends and you want to change that, going to third places can really help. The other thing that can help is structured third places. What do I mean by that? It means like joining the local adult, soccer team, tennis club, ultimate frisbee club, whatever. The ones that are not like hardcore and competing if you're not really at that level, but like the ones that are just like, we get together and we play this sport or do this activity for the sake of it. Bingo hall, absolutely, to Tiburon and Arata. And yeah, the game store, board game store, going to those events and those nights. This is another thing. Let's say you've not been explicitly invited to a party, but you have a video game store, a board game store, whatever comic book store that you like, and you see people there on occasion that potentially could be friends with you, and you want to make friends with people who are interested in, say, playing a lot of board games together. And you're too shy to, say, go on meetup.com and see if there's any board game meetups or set one up yourself. You're not ready for that yet. Keep an eye out for when your local store is having events, and you don't even have to talk to anybody there. This is the other thing. People psych themselves out by thinking, I'm going to have to go and be like cool and like impress people and like already be comfortable with everything. When in reality, the mere exposure effect can help. You just go, show your face, see the people. Maybe you say hey to the people that you've like sussed out, maybe seem like they could be good friends, or like the cute person. Don't immediately go and start hitting on them, maybe, but like you can just be like, hey, this is an interesting event, isn't it? Just something. It doesn't even have to be that impressive, as long as you're not like overbearing about it or like trying to trap them in the conversation or coming in too hot and too strong. That plants a little seed of like, this person had a not terribly unpleasant interaction with you and they saw you again, and that's going to continue to help them feel good about you. Now, It's not always foolproof. You might come off wrong. The person, you might remind them of somebody from their past that they feel really uncomfortable with. Whatever can happen. However, it still is increasing the odds because, again, this comes back to a central theme. If the structure of your daily life does not facilitate you either seeing the friends you already have or facilitate you meeting new people who could become friends, you are not going to change the situation. You are not going to suddenly have friends. You will need to figure out within the structure of your daily life, where are there intervention points that you feel comfortable with playing around with, that to build yourself the opportunity to either see the friends that you have more or to meet new people who could become friends. And it's okay to be really thoughtful about what makes the most sense. Does it make sense for me to go down to like the local sports bar? No, like I don't like sports. I wish I did. I genuinely wish I enjoyed sports because I think that it's cool and I would love to like be at the pub with everybody, like standing watching the TV and getting all hyped up, but I just cannot, no matter how hard I try. However, it does make sense for me to go to the local metal bar where people are allowed to bring their own playlists and everyone takes turns and just like chill out, have a few drinks, eat some chips. People see me and then maybe I come in and talk, or like whoever's time it is to play, I like say, hey, I love this, creator. Yeah, it's the best. And like, you got some real classic, like black metal on there. I love it. Bathory. Like, for me, that makes sense. The board game shop, the video game shop. It's a little complicated. As a woman, I've had many a time where I like was going to put myself out there and go to like the Magic the Gathering or D&D events, and I was the only woman there, and I lasted like 15 minutes before I was like, no, no, I'm just going to leave. But strategic, you can be strategic. Think about where are you most likely. There is this idea of like barking up the wrong tree, which is like aiming for a goal in places that don't facilitate or support that goal. The more you can get mere exposure, build small but semi-regular positive interactions with people. Yeah, Jakey, unfortunately, Magic the Gathering is toxic. I used to do tournaments when I was a kid, won every tournament I was in, and every time, almost, it was a dude at the last stage when they lost, they did not take it well and like got really angry at me. One person even said that they need to have a separate girls' league or something. Anyway, I did not stay in that world for that long as a result, which is too bad because I like Magic. I like drafting. That's my favorite. I love the challenge. I love the game. It's fun. And yet, it sucks. It sucks. And this is the other thing about like building resilient communities. That's inevitably a community that is only going to have so much shelf life. Because if you constantly alienate people out of the community and you don't do things to make people feel welcome and to build like a self-sustaining thing, it's going to get smaller over time. Anyway. Okay, continuing, nascent friendship, or moving towards friendship, 3. This is the third stage of friendship where you start to make arrangements to spend time together. Getting from 2 to 3 is sometimes really difficult and sometimes really scary. It can be like just as stressful as asking for someone's phone number or asking them out on a date. It's helpful when it's structured, like you're on a team together or you go to events together or something and you see each other there. It's because it already builds it in a little bit, but then still you want to transition out of that at some point. So what I recommend doing is in the friendly relations, get to a place where you've had, 5 to 10 slightly sustained, really positive interactions with somebody. So I mean, like, it can't be a 5-minute conversation, but where you talk to someone for maybe 15 to 30 minutes and it's pleasant, even if it's not just a one-on-one, it's like a small group convo and you're enjoying it. Maybe you've told each other a couple of jokes. Once it kind of gets to that level, ask someone, hey, I'm going to go see the new superhero movie, or like this new cyberpunk movie just came out. Do you want to go see that with me? I'm going to go Friday. Or, and I recommend inviting people out the first few times to make plans with them. Especially if you're nervous, not things that would require you to be really on the whole time. So a common thing people want to do is invite someone out to like go for a coffee at a cafe. That's really nice. I enjoy that. But that's going to require for that to really facilitate the development of friendship, you're going to need to be able to have a lot of easy conversation. That means that you're both going to need to be good at conversation. You're going to need to find it smooth and easy to talk with each other. And it's going to need to be sustained. And that can be difficult. So something like going to the movies is, I think, less stressful because you chat a little bit beforehand. You've got maybe 15, 20 minutes. You mostly talk about the film probably, or like how you've been. You get snacks. You maybe share snacks, whatever. You watch the movie, then you chat for a little while after the movie about how it went, and then you're good. Because that already gives you all of this structure benefit. Another thing you can invite people to do or to try to make plans to do is some sort of outing, like hiking or going to the beach, something that's really, really structured in a way that is the expectation is not we're going to sit and be in one-on-one conversation for an hour or more. And, whatever it is that works well for you. It could be, hey, there's another event of this kind that we're at right now, in the other side of the city this Thursday. Do you want to go to that with me? I'm planning on going. And I agree, Aradin. I think going to the movies is better for friendships than dates, especially early dates, because in the early stages, you really do want to be getting to know each other and figuring out pretty quickly, like, are we compatible in these really serious ways? You going places, Krellin, it is yes. It is yes, I agree, but also friendship. Yeah, if you can't talk to people, it is not good for dates in general. Yeah, for sure. But I recommend just doing things that like reduce the pressure that we might feel to try to be as cool or as entertaining or as clever as possible. And like desensitize ourselves a little bit to the exposure to each other in, a more intentional way. Like if we go to the movies together, that's going to desensitize me a little bit to like how stressed out I feel about trying to become friends with this person, especially if I'm nervous about being able to really talk with them. Because the more I'm exposed to them in these sorts of ways, the less pressure it's going to be. And then as we've had a few of these experiences together, it'll be a lot easier for me to just be myself with you rather than like be trying so hard to be funny and make jokes and impress you. It's just better. Okay. The next one is nascent friendship. You and the friend think of yourselves as friends and have your own relationship rules and interaction patterns. So relationship rules here includes things like your consent framework with each other. Is this person comfortable with me just like calling them anytime, or do they only want me to text? Are we chill with each other, just like showing up with a 6-pack of beer to each other's houses anytime and like watching the game together or watching a movie or playing Xbox? Do we feel good about inviting each other to play games together on Steam? How likely are we to feel comfortable with approaching each other in public, in new spaces, etc., etc.? They will have relationship rules and interaction patterns. Interaction patterns now means how do we generally spend time with each other? Is it really normal for us to just come over to each other's house and like binge watch Star Trek together? Or would that be kind of weird? I once tried to have a Halloween party where I wanted people to come over and watch like the Addams Family and some scary movies with me. And like that was literally what the party was titled. It was like, we'll have snacks, we'll chat for a little bit, then we're gonna watch a movie, take a break, play some board games, and watch another movie, and then, start handing out candy to kids and stuff. And when I actually put the movies on, a bunch of people were like, "What are you doing? You're trying to sit down and watch a movie? Like, it's kind of weird at a party." And I was like, I just kind of wanted people to hang out with me and watch scary movies while we handed out Halloween candy to kids. But that didn't work because that wasn't very skillful on my part, because I didn't have that kind of interaction pattern with a lot of those people. So you got to kind of establish that. What is the way you tend to hang out with each other? That doesn't mean that it can't grow and change over time, but you've got some sense of the shape of the friendship. Next is stabilized friendship. This is the fifth stage of a friendship, where there is the assumption of stability and trust in the relationship based on a history of shared intimate information. The relationship may continue in this stage forever. So usually between stages 4 and 5, you start sharing more personal information. Unless you're me and you tell people your entire life story the first time you meet them, whatever. No, but like I'm not that bad. And there are definitely things that I share with people more when I've gotten to know them, especially the details of certain aspects of my life and the way certain things made me feel. I might be really comfortable telling somebody about something difficult in my past, especially if they want to know, or in like a workshop, it's relevant for me to give it as an example. But the details of like what it was like for me to experience that and how I felt about it and how I feel now, that's more as we transition from 4 to 5. You start to really share a lot. This is where people can go wrong too. If you're really starved for interaction with people and you're really feeling the loneliness and you really need somebody, I recommend getting a therapist first, even one that is just someone you see a little bit, so you can get all of that, like, I need closeness so bad word vomit out to someone who's safe. Because if you do that too quickly in stages 1 to 3, especially in a way that feels like you need something from the recipient, that is likely to be overwhelming to them. It's like, think of the person who comes up to you at the bus stop, and rather than making pleasant conversation with you and chit-chatting about life, or talking about their favorite book or whatever, they just start telling you about all their health problems and how stressful their doctor's appointments are. That's a lot. That's a lot. And you're unlikely to then want to continue being friends with that person. That happened to me at the airport recently on my flight back. There was a woman who was like having trouble with the logistics of something. She was like older, she was like crying very obviously and like huffing and throwing her, like really trying to be like, help me, I'm so helpless. And I was like, no, I don't. Because I knew exactly what was going to happen, which is she eventually came over to me, asked me for baseline information that I gave her because it's the right thing to do. And then for the next 4 hours would not leave me alone. I could not get away from her. If I said, oh, I'm going to go get some water, she would have to come too. If I was going to go to the bathroom, she'd be like, oh, that's a good idea. Like, that's a killer, right? We're never going to actually get past the role limited interactions, but she's acting like we are in stabilized friendship. And well, she wasn't a native English speaker and did not have very much of a command of English. And so it was genuinely difficult for me to convey a lot of things because we didn't really have any other shared languages. I tried. And she was very bad at listening as well. So even though I've got like more than a decade of experience of talking to absolute beginners in English, she was not interested in paying enough attention to hear what I said. Anyway, I give you this example that these are oh, Paladin Hulk. And I think that would work, but also I think then she would start screaming that I had like hurt her or something. I give you these examples that are really extreme and obvious because a lot of us do this without meaning to way lesser degrees, but with basically the same effect, which is that you stress out the person you're talking to and overwhelm them. And if you don't feel really confident and competent, I just mixed them together, but I mean both words, in your ability to say, tell an engaging, funny anecdote about childhood trauma, maybe save it for like when you're in stages 4 to 5. Don't try to do it in like 2 to 3, because that might just kind of overwhelm the person. And they might just think like, whoa, this person seems really messed up because they just like made this really uncomfortable joke about something really dark or whatever. What I recommend doing is just, really taking it slow. Don't like clam up or anything. That's not what I'm saying either, but just allow it to slowly progress. And if you want, when in doubt, you can follow the other person's lead. If they start opening up, that doesn't mean like immediately afterwards open up to them. Like, use the active and reflective listening skills. Really be there with them and hold space for them if they're opening up and sharing with you, and like engage with that and keep the sort of conversation on them as long as they're comfortable. And then okay, this person feels like this is where our relationship is at, so I can feel okay to share something similar as well at another point. But this is, people really, really shoot themselves in the foot getting in between these stages by moving too fast, assuming too much too quickly. The same is true of dating. This is kind of similar levels of intensity of change through dating. We've got the evolution of romance here, but we can really assume that these are kind of similar in terms of the escalation of intensity. In dating, it's usually a little bit more truncated, the speed, but it depends on the person. Some people really like to take things slow. But if you come in with too many assumptions or too much too fast, that's really going to scare people away. It's like the stereotype of the person who on the first date wants to pick out your kids' names. Like, right, not gonna really facilitate that. So really give it time to move through, and be careful. Be careful. There's a lot of things that you can do poorly at this stage. Things like getting really passive aggressive. Like on Sunday, we read this scenario of someone who was getting really jealous because their friend had made another friend and they stopped playing this game together. And so they got really passive aggressive about these things. They were already probably in nascent or stabilized friendship, but that's a real good way to deteriorate that friendship fast. If you get really jealous really quickly, that's going to deteriorate friendships and romantic relationships. It's also, if you get too clingy and you plan things that are too big too quickly, right? Taking a big, week-long road trip or camping trip or whatever with a good friend works when you're in stabilized friendship, or even when you're in nascent friendship, depending on people's personalities, that could be possible. But if you try to plan a week-long road trip with people where you're in friendly relations, that's going to come off weird, right? So the length and intensity of the interactions also needs to scale pretty well, where you slowly ramp it up to things that are more intense. Okay, so what does this all mean? This means that it's time to play Stardew Valley. We're going to read more of this next time. I want to talk more about what waning friendship is like, and next time we'll also talk a bit more about things that negatively impact these 1 to 3 movement, including not being able to see each other enough. Like, that should be obvious by now, but if it's not, like, one of the things that will totally impact it really negatively is if you never get to see each other. That can really slowly atrophy progress that you have made. All right. So, in summary, we looked at this meme and we talked about this stuff. We talked about these 3 videos. We read this article. We looked at the source. I gave you another source. And then we read a little bit about friendship. So now it is time to play some Stardew Valley and for me to update the stream information to go to Stardew Valley. I'm going to do that now. Updating it. Cool, cool. I'm going to close this and I'm going to go over to gameplay. I'm going to bring up Stardew Valley. Sweet. Okay. I don't have a cold or anything. I've got like, I think a little bit of a sinus infection, which always happens if my allergies get too bad, which they always do when I'm exposed to other people's dust, basically. And so, oh, Krellin, oh no, here come all the weirdos that like watching people play games. Yeah, I mean, for sure. But I'm okay with those weirdos. It's nice to hang out with them, like you all. You're all a bunch of weirdos, for sure. Let me make sure this looks good. Be a little bit bigger up here. That's fine. That's fine. And then I'm going to change the speaker. So that way, because desktop audio should also be in there. So you should all be able to hear this time. Oh, wow, that's cut off. Okay. Weird. I'm going to adjust this now that I see that it's cut off. This is so confusing. I will like never, I think, truly get the hang of what? Load. I think I hit co-op. There we go. There we go. Okay. I don't know why I created Tree Farm, but I did. And then I didn't play it at all. As you can see, I like created it and I was like, never mind. We're not going to Provence Farm. We're going to Castle Farm. So Jakey, you said, I'm looking at hostels in Vienna. And what I'm looking at is a 5-minute walk from the Westbahnhof. Wow. Does the audio sound really bad for everybody? Okay, so I turned the audio off on my end, but is it still staticky for you all? I don't know why this game does this. It's so weird. It's so weird. This is on like a ridiculously high-end computer. It should not sound so bad. This is a very low usage game. Anyway. Chocolate cake. I already know. Even these sound effects are a bit crunchy. All right. What's the fortune teller say? Very displeased. Okay, bummer. Okay, so let's keep chatting about friendship a little bit. Because this game, I think, does do some things. Emily gave me a really cool sewing machine. That's so nice. And talking about energy crystals. Cool. Cool. Probably the network, not the hardware. I don't know. I have no idea. I believe you, Krellin. I have one, you tend to know what you're talking about, and two, I have genuinely no idea where to even start to think about why this is so bad. Luckily, like, it's not all. Yeah, well, the OBS is not what's producing my sound. I mean, it is picking up the desktop sound, but through my own speakers, it's coming out and it sounds terrible. So that's why I'm unsure what could be the culprit. This will happen sometimes when I'm just playing. It would happen on my laptop when I was playing the game outside of streaming times. All right, I gotta go get my milk bucket. Move these things around. so I can milk my animals. So let's think a little bit about some things that really can make the transition from level 1 to level 3 friendship fall apart. So we talked about how, like, if you're way too eager, it can be a turnoff for people, right? If you try to escalate things too quickly and it makes people uncomfortable, that really can be a turnoff, right? Unfortunately. And how, like, if you're really lonely and desperate for friendship, probably a good idea to get a therapist for a little while so that you can have someone to talk to get some of that energy out. Some of that sort of like built up, I need someone to tell my feelings to energy. All right. Oh my goodness, I missed again. Missed. There we go. And some other things are not seeing them enough. You know, this game does have some amount of like friendship decay. I'm pretty sure there is like I know that your relationship with your spouse can decay until it gets to a certain level. The one thing that's really unrealistic is that, like, not the one thing, but one thing that is really unrealistic is the idea that once a friendship gets to a certain level of depth, it just is going to stay at that level. Whereas even with somebody, you know, there are people who are like me, where like you've not seen someone for years, and then you see them again, and it's like no time has passed at all. But that's also not true for everyone I'm friends with. There are definitely people where I haven't seen them for years, and if I saw them again, it would definitely be as though time had passed, and we'd basically be starting over. No matter how close we had been originally. And that's one of those things that is really facilitated by seeing each other often. Even if you don't talk very deeply, seeing each other regularly can make a huge difference in how well you will actually be able to be friends with each other. Do I have any other seeds that need to be planted? 24th of the season. I don't really have much time left. I'm just gonna hold off. Just assume. Rodden, you said needing to find friends can make it much harder to actually define and develop friends. Yes, because you're absolutely right, Rodden, because having friends already often makes it easier to, there's specifically a word for it. Give me a second if I remember it. Triadic enclosure or something? I don't remember what it was. But it's when you become friends with your friend's friends. And that facilitates friendship as well. And makes the bonds for everybody, generally speaking, stronger, unless it, you know, surprisingly produces strong feelings of jealousy or something, which it can, right? Like, there are definitely people who will have that reaction to you becoming good friends with their other friends, which is unfortunate, right? Very unfortunate. Let's see. Do I have a quest on? Cryptic note. Reach level 100 in the Skull Cavern. Mare's Need. Lewis wants some truffle oil. Pufferfish. God, I don't really have the ability to do any of those things right at this moment. Keep doing some farm work. Yeah, unless you develop a crush on your friend's boyfriend. That's just like, yeah. That was a sad situation. Lots of thoughts, for sure. All right, I'm going to put you down here. And then... Let's see. So these are also going. Can do beer. Oh yeah, nice. Just push that all through. Rodden, you said, I used to have that problem as whenever I made a friend, I would be so excited to have a friend that I would smother them with attention. Yeah. It's a delicate balance too, and it's going to be one of the things that makes it tough is it's also different from person to person. What feels like regular, facilitating contact with one person is going to feel stressful and overwhelming to another. Can I build truffle crust? What do I need? Oil maker. I need slime. All right, I gotta go get 50 slime. I have that. I have. Just gonna go to the regular mines and get some slime. And I think it's really normal, especially if you don't have any other sort of things going on in your life, to get really excited. And there are times where, like, I've definitely smothered people I wanted to be friends with. It's very easy to do. It's difficult because it varies from person to person. And these are often things that are like unwritten rules that the people themselves are not always aware of, right? That's the other thing that makes it, oh, that's such a gross sound. I'm so sorry. Hard. Let me see what you're saying, Valium. Rodney said, which is why I'm probably too timid in interacting with people now. That's also pretty normal to like swing really far in the other direction. And over time, it hopefully will equalize as long as you don't get really stuck there. Valium, what I find particularly exhausting with most social interactions is I'm not sure how to best explain it, this tangible pressure to make sure your answers and reactions match the expectations. For example, someone tells me about their weekend, I'm expected to be interested, maybe say, whoa, that's cool, tell me more. Or perhaps someone tells me something that is funny to them, I'm expected to laugh with them. And when my natural or genuine reactions do not align with the expectations, I have to act in order to meet them. And I know that if I don't, the person will get upset. This is something that is very draining for me. Yeah, I would say that, like, this is unfortunately, there's kind of two parts to the way I want to respond to this. One is like, everybody has to do this to a certain degree. I'm sure you know this, and it is not always great, right? It's performing for each other. And it's especially hard if people aren't very good at conversation, which a lot of people aren't. And we don't want to let people down. And especially if you've got any people-pleasing tendencies, that can make it a lot harder to feel comfortable being genuine with people. Though a certain amount of being genuine is important. Like if someone says a joke that you don't find funny, it's okay to just be like, oh, that joke didn't really do it for me. You don't necessarily have to make a big deal about it. A lot of things in life are really well smoothed over simply by being chill about things. Just being like, yeah, I don't know, that joke didn't hit me right. Right? Like people go to see, famous comedians all the time, and comedians will have jokes that flop. And that's just part of trying to tell a joke, right? There are plenty of times where I've told jokes and no one realizes that I'm joking. And people either just like give me blank stares, or they get really uncomfortable, or they like respond to something with way too much seriousness, which is also something I can be guilty of as well. Like, I tend to not realize people are being sarcastic and respond to people's statements as though they were saying something very genuine. And it's difficult, right? And I would say this is something that everybody kind of has difficulty with. The other thing I would say is there's a technique called conversational editing. It takes practice, and you have to be pretty good at active and reflective listening first to really do it and it not just be weird. Oh God. These sounds. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna make sure I turn the volume down on this a lot. Sorry, y'all. I don't know why it's doing this today. Ugh. But basically, most people aren't very good at conversation, which means that they might actually have something interesting to say, but they're not necessarily very good at expressing that. And one of the reasons why I think it's really safe to assume that other people actually do have interesting things to say is that we read books, which are basically one person's long monologue, right? And I mean, we as in general, people read books. And by getting good at sort of helping people tease out the interesting bits of their conversation, you're going to have a much better time being a part of that conversation. And so I try to not think of asking those questions so much as like a performance, though I myself, even though I teach communication skills, can forget to do that on certain times. And whatnot. It's something that as you get better at it, when people tend to feel more comfortable actually sharing interesting bits. Sorry, I know this answer's kind of all over the place. But the other bit is that small talk is like kind of really something a lot of people will say that they hate. But small talk is like the foreplay, basically, for better talk, which is that you got to warm people up and people got to know that they're safe with you. Small talk is how people sort of get the general idea that it's safe to talk about something more interesting. Now, there are definitely some people who either will never feel that way or for whatever reason are not really capable of going to a more interesting subject. And that's unfortunate, and you don't have to be friends with them. But a lot of the time, it just takes time to build the trust. But it is exhausting, and it can be. With the people get upset, I do have the question, though, of like, how do they get upset? Like, if someone tells a joke and you don't laugh at it, what's the sort of thing that's happening? Valium. All right, where is their slimes? Must have not be a high enough level yet. Rod, and you said, all my friendships these days are online. So I kind of sidestepped it, although even then I'm never exactly sure how to develop those either. Yeah, I mean, online friendships take a similar pattern, I would say, but I imagine that there are some distinct differences. I haven't really read enough about the sort of like social psychology of friendship processes in online spaces. And I don't even know if I doubt there's as robust a body of research as there is for offline friendships. But I would be really curious. There probably are studies, like I'm 100% sure there are, but I doubt they are as substantial as in terms of how many there are and the depth that they go to. Oh my goodness. Bat, get away from me. Yay, down. All right, I'm gonna just try to go to a deeper floor. Yeah, many people believe that, but I think a lot of the time a lot of researchers are interested in online interactions, and people who are studying friendship specifically, I kind of have my doubts that the whole cohort of people would view online interactions as not real friendships. Especially if you guys want me to just disable the sound completely too, please let me know. Especially since, a lot of people have pretty much all of their friendships and social interactions online. And I don't just mean since like the pandemic and work from home and everything. I mean, it's been this way for a long time for a lot of people. I only have 7 slime and I need 50. Ugh. That'd take forever. That's fine. It's fine. It's not a lucky day, so spirits are very displeased. So I feel like on a lucky day, I'll probably get fewer monsters, but the monsters will be more likely to drop things. But yeah, a little bit of a sinus infection. It's in the way. I was so worried it was COVID when I got back, and I've tested multiple times and it's not, so I'm very thankful. And also just like still a little aghast at how well masks seem to work. All right, Valley, let me see what you're saying. Oh, Rodden, you asked, do Twitch streams count as a third place digitally anyway? I would say to a certain extent they do. They lack a lot of the features of third places in facilitating a lot of things, because I would say that aside from like Twitch streamers themselves who may have struck it big and become wealthy, I imagine that the demographics of Twitch viewership is very homogenized in the sense that the majority of there's a couple of pools, certain age groups that tend to, I think, in many ways self-segregate without needing anything outside. And then I would say that people are likely to watch streamers who are of historical similar backgrounds to them. Even if the streamer has like since, become much more wealthy, there's still going to be a lot of things that are in common. But Valium, what did you say? I'm not a very expressive person and it causes those scenarios to happen a lot. I mean, in that it causes people to get upset is that they can blame me for not showing emotions or making me feel like they annoy me or things like that. So that makes me really curious if maybe you're not also, unfortunately, surrounded by a bunch of assholes. Because, like, a lot of people have very sort of diminished affect or not strong affect, meaning that they don't physically express a lot of emotion on their face. And that's not that rare. It's more rare to be very expressive. And it's strange to me that people would like actively call that out as well. Like, I have never in my experience in life told a joke, had people not laugh at it, and then be annoyed at them for not laughing at my joke, or like ask them why they didn't laugh. Like, now I know there are a lot of people who are like really insecure, and there's always Reddit posts about like, my girlfriend got mad at me for not laughing at her joke or whatever. Like, sure, that does happen. But I fell asleep. I knew I wasn't going to get home, but at least I got out of the lower part of the mines. But yeah, some of that would really surprise me. Does your family get on your case about like not? Oh my God. Okay. I'm just turning this off. It's just too bad at this point. We can just chat. I don't need the sound. Is your family who gets on your case about it? 1,000 gold from falling asleep at the clinic. That's fine. I mean, like, this is not to say that I don't believe you. I do want to stress that, like, 100% believe you. I just wanted to understand what you meant when you said upset. And because there's, a lot of different things that people can mean when they say someone was upset with them. And then, yeah, I just wanted to understand who is it who is having those reactions to you, because they're, I think, probably supreme weirdos. Like, I know that there was this famous news anchor who was really big in the 80s and 90s. I think she's still pretty big. She's Asian. I don't know her name, but she would get shit all the time behind the scenes, where people would say that she seemed, because of her monolid, they said that she seemed like she was being really rude to the people she was interviewing because she seemed tired and disinterested. So she got double eyelid surgery, basically because of weird racist pressure to literally change her anatomy to conform to particular expectations of what being interested looks like. And so I know that some people would say those kinds of things. but I'm very curious about like what is the relationship between you and them. Uh, it might be. I'd have to look her up to know if it was her. She was like one of the first Asian American news anchors on national news. And it was like a really big deal. And then I watched this documentary about like institutional racism in plastic surgery. And she was interviewed for it and said that she regretted it to a certain extent, but also was just like, my career wouldn't have happened if I didn't have this eyelid surgery. So I feel like it's justifiable because of the representation that it brought. And it's still really sad though. Arad and you said, thanks, Carlin, for finding it. And you said, my one cat has come to join me, so was blocking the screen as he was playing with some of the dice I have here. Nice. Nice. I hope it was cute. Like at the start of the new season, I'm going to have a ton of trees I need to chop down. A lot of these are growing. Did I say hi to you, Grand Nagus? All right, time to go get my milk can and say hi to all the other things. Let me just move these. Okay. Thank you, Krellin, for finding it. But it's just so sad that like someone would get surgery because of someone else's perception that they looked bored because of literally what Asians with monolids look like. That's just difficult. What's Rodden has no milk right now? That's weird. That's weird. Okay, I'm just gonna miss again. So, yeah, going back to the friendship processes and moving from sort of like situational acquaintanceship to, you know, early budding friendship to nascent friendship. I think that some of the ways that people really shoot themselves in the foot is also things like getting really, really sensitive about small misunderstandings or transgressions. What I mean to say there is like if someone is kind of rude one time, or like we feel like they're being rude to us one time, we can do a spontaneous trait attribution, in which because we saw somebody be some way one time, we mistakenly assume that that is like their whole personality. Or we basically, the idea is the less we know each other, somebody, the more likely we are to assume that anything we see a person do is a fundamental aspect of who they are. So if we don't know somebody at all, for example, and you know we go to a store and someone's kind of rude, we're more likely to assume that the shop worker is a rude person rather than something like they were having a bad day and they weren't in a good mood. And it is most likely that this trait is something that is situational and is transient, that they're not probably always like that, especially if they're like a waiter or a waitress or something. They would likely be fired if they were always that way, right? If they were just constantly rude to the customers, they would it would be less likely that they would keep that job for very long. So, but because especially if we don't know somebody that well, we're more likely to assume that a trait that they have is really universal about their character rather than something from a situation. And this goes both ways in terms of the risk that this presents, which is that if you do something, the person you're hanging out with is more likely to potentially mistakenly attribute that behavior to your fundamental character and then think, oh, you must just be this X, Y, or Z way, versus thinking that maybe it was just an off day or you were really stressed. So one of the things you can do there, if you catch yourself, if you realize you've done something that maybe is not great and maybe could alienate somebody. Hi, Kettlestick. Then it's good to just like call it out and just be like, hey, even if it's the next day or a couple days later, just to say, hey, I realize looking back, I was being really standoffish or grumpy or something the other day. It was because of this. Because that what that does is that shows to the person that you're self-aware, and that also you can take ownership of behaviors, and also that you can give an explanation that can help them to feel like this is not a sort of essential part of your character versus just something that was situational. And it's also good to just like be comfortable with apologizing to people and practice apologizing for really low stakes things. And another thing that can happen is if somebody is, does something weird or something that we don't like, when we don't know them very well, that can cause us to really quickly de-invest in the friendship. We can be like, oh, it seems like this person is an ass, or this person isn't nice or something, when it was really just like a one-time thing. All right. What are y'all saying? Rodney said, oh yeah, I had that. I want to get my watering can from Clint, but it looks like he's not here anymore. I just saw him walking around and just disappeared. No, he's in. I saw him walking around, but whatever. Now I got my gold watering can. Perfect. Oh yeah, I had that before as well, as I was bullied a lot when younger, so I learned to try to keep a blank expression when nervous, as I didn't want to draw attention. As if I did that, then they would often invite bullying in the past. So the one time many, many years ago, friends threw a surprise party for me. I had little reaction and they were surprised, but it was a defense mechanism. And I felt bad about it, as I did really appreciate it. Yeah, that's rough. And it's rough that like people can't, sometimes people struggle to just accept that there is diversity in how expressive people are, and that there might be other things going on with somebody that don't mean that they're a bad person or not actually appreciating something simply because they didn't react in a certain way. But that means that we have to also be careful with that too. We want people to be more careful with that and not just assume that like we didn't actually like something because we didn't respond in a certain way. We need to extend that to other people. So we have to be really careful to make sure we're not assuming that other people, were lying or were not really interested in something because they didn't respond the way that we think. Because, if they didn't seem really interested in something, for example, maybe they were really distracted. Maybe they've got like something stressful going on at work, or they, are addicted to their phone and they would in reality love to like actually talk to you about something, and then they struggle with that, or they've just got a new cell phone game and it's eating their whole brain. So then we want to be really careful in these stages from 1 to 3 when we still don't know each other that well and there isn't necessarily a lot of context, to be really careful of assuming anything universal about somebody. And it can be tough because sometimes we can get really excited to meet somebody at the beginning, and then something can happen. They can do or say something that can burst a bubble. And even if I need tuna to rub on my sore calves. Please bring one as soon as you can, Shane. Okay, Shane. We have that bubble can burst where we feel this real like, glow and excitement at the potential of a new friend. And we have to be really careful with ourselves and how we think about something, because we don't want that to turn into, it doesn't feel this like thing I can project onto all the time anymore, or this fantasy that I have in my head of what this friendship is going to be. And therefore, I'm not going to invest in it anymore, or it's not real, or it's a disappointment or something. because there's a good chance that whatever it was that bothered us was a temporary situation, right? There's a chance that it is not fully who that person is in its entirety. So, to review, one of the things that we can do is misattributing a, contextual or situational character trait to being something universal about the person, and the other people can do that about us. So we want to be careful to recognize and regularly remind ourselves that something that disappoints us about a new friend or whatever is potentially just situational, and or if we've realized that we've done something that maybe alienated somebody and put them off. Whoa, I just realized that like this circle and this circle seem almost like they're at different sort of like camera angles from each other. This one is like a little bit more. Yeah. I mean, it could just be that it's supposed to be like an oval instead of a circle, but it's tripping me up. Anyway. Goodness. I'm going to do some fishing. I'm going to go to the ocean and fish. That if we realize we've done something, if we behaved in a way that might be off-putting to somebody, to just be willing to call it out and apologize for it and tell someone why. Let people know that it wasn't a thing that you're going to repeat all the time. It was just a bad day. And then the I know I won't kink shame Shane, but you mentioned Aradin like finding out they're an anti-vaxxer. Yeah, everybody's got things that are hard limits for sure, right? Like for me, if somebody is the kind of person who responds to the phrase Black Lives Matter immediately with like, no, all lives matter, maybe when Black Lives Matter was like first a slogan many, many years ago, I could tolerate that a little bit as long as I could explain to them what the phrase actually is about and, come to an understanding. But for me at this point, it's like this is a phrase that has existed for a while. And I feel like, especially if you're in the English speaking world, you have less of an excuse for not going out and actually learning about it, right? And the same is true with a lot of stuff to do with racism, right? There's some things, especially if someone's much, much younger, or, if you're not an American, I don't expect you to know that much about American racism. However, I have less and less tolerance for that as I get older, because I expect that if it was something that was ever going to matter to the person or mattered to the person, they would have taken the time to learn about it at this point. It's readily available online. This is not something that's like gate kept information. And so to me, it's like, yeah, I'm okay. I have hard limits about some of these things. Somebody who's like actively rude to wait staff, at a restaurant or cafe, I am not that cool with that. And there are things that like I once went to a restaurant with a group of people that I was like vaguely getting to know, and the person who kind of arranged the get together, she was convinced that the tea that was for the table had been like really watered down, and that we were going to be then like overcharged for a watered down product. And she made this like really big stink and like demanded that we get a bunch of free stuff and whatnot. And it was like, it was a kind of tea that is also the kind of thing that like it's very common for people to intentionally add more water to it because it can be quite a strong taste. It's barley tea or mugicha. And I was really just kind of uncomfortable with how that went. And that was like the first time I met this person. And so I was like, cool. I don't know if I'm that interested in like further developing the friendship. So we all have things. However, if it's something where, one time you get in, say you're someone who generally speaking likes things to be neat and tidy, and you don't feel very comfortable in very messy spaces. The first time you go into somebody's car, go to somebody's house, and it's kind of messy, don't assume that's the way it always is. I mean, and vice versa. Like, if you go to someone's house and it's really clean one time, don't necessarily assume that's the way it always is, right? But, there can be things that are really circumstantial. If somebody gets really frustrated with their kids, for example, sometimes people can assume that this person must be a bad parent, but everybody gets overwhelmed. Everybody gets to limits. Everybody can have times where they are not as, perfectly charming and patient and whatever gentle parenting 24/7 all the time. And generally speaking, unless I think something is a pattern of very abusive behavior, or there's something that's no, even one time this is abusive, or even one time this is neglect, I generally speaking think it's good to just not judge how other people raise their kids, because everybody's got to do what they got to do to survive. So if there's someone who's parking their kid in front of the TV or handing them an iPad or something because they can't, be entertaining enough for their kid, and their kid's going to start screaming, and maybe that behavior has been reinforced or something, I'm not going to judge them. They did what they needed to do. It's fine. I might judge somebody who, say, has a dog that has really serious food guarding behaviors, because that's a dangerous dog. And if the person didn't take the time to learn how to not have a dangerous dog when they had it as a puppy, or does not take responsibility for the fact that there's a huge bite risk there, then maybe I'm going to judge them a little bit, because that means that a lot of, especially children, can get really easily. I was bit by a bunch of dogs as a kid who were resource guarding, and I didn't realize they had a bone or something nearby, and they bit me, and it happened frequently enough that it's, to me and other people. Kettlestick, I'm backing up to see what you said. You said, I think all lives matter, people actively avoid learning about it. Yeah, probably. And then you also said, Rodden, you said, oh yeah, definitely not the best first impression. Yeah, for sure. And Kettlestick, yeah, being a parent has given me a huge amount of perspective about other parents and their kids. And I think that that's something that, parents can judge other parents really hard, but also people who don't have kids can judge people who do have kids. And I remember thinking as a kid, every situation is different. So unless it's something that I feel really gets into these very clearly harmful behaviors, I don't care, right? You want to do whatever hippie thing, or you want to do this, I think the terms are crunchy versus silky parenting. So crunchy are the people who are really earthy, crunchy, all natural, no screen time. They don't wear shoes. They go to unschooling kind of parenting, versus the silky parents, the ones who are my kids eat processed food and watch TV and whatever. Whatever. Everybody's going to be messed up anyway. At least do it creatively. I mean, I'm joking. There's a book that's just how to fuck up your kids with style, which is a very funny book that Charlie and I read a long time ago. But there's some truth to that, right? And so I just don't judge. And then Kettlestick, you added, the idea that screen time is detrimental doesn't hold up to scientific scrutiny. TV time is basically a necessity. You don't have time in the day to entertain them, so the option is either they watch TV or they scream for 20 minutes while I clean. Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is I know for myself, the way I live my life is definitely a balance of crunchy and silky. I don't really like to have that many clothes in my house that are not natural fibers. But oh, sorry. I mean, you're both the same color on my screen, and it both starts with a K, Krellin, but I should be more careful about it. So generally speaking, I try to have as few non-natural fibers as possible. I only have carpets that are natural fibers. Um, whatever. But also, like, I play a ton of video games and watch a lot of TV, so whatever. Like, I do a lot of herbal remedies and drink a lot of herbal teas that are supposed to help with different things, but I will not take an ibuprofen if I'm in pain, to the point that I gave myself a stomach ulcer like a year ago, but that's because I have joints and nerve pain constantly. But anyway, like I'm not the kind of person who's just like, no, you're just supposed to only do this. Like, I don't care, whatever. Give me, I want the ibuprofen, just give it to me. Um, but I imagine that these are things that will continue to evolve as I have children, right? I doubt that I'm going to always be this particular balance of crunchy to silky when I have kids. Wait. Oh yeah, sorry, Carlin. Kettlestick fixed. Kettlestick, wait, why didn't it work? I tried to change the color, but it didn't change. Fail. And then yeah, it changed. Yeah, it's green. Green. Yeah, which is good. Because for the most part, everybody it really is a different color, which is very helpful. Um, but yeah, it's really don't try not to judge people, especially when you're first getting to know them. There are people that I'm good friends with that I have there are things I'm disappointed in them for, right? Like I have some people that I'm friends with that are, in between the nascent and established friendship. And as I've gotten to know them, there are some things that, like, over the course of our friendship, I've maybe been a bit disappointed about, either in like, I thought this was going to have more potential than it did, or like behaviors where I'm like, oh, this was actually like a shitty thing. But overall, that's not going to make me just like completely abandon the friendship. But then there are also people that I become friends with here a little bit, and there was a lot of potential, and we seemed to really vibe at the beginning. And then, no, just not happening. They just really proved themselves to be people I can't vibe with like at all. And because of really, really fundamental differences in our worldview and our ethics, and that led to a lot of tension, for example. With the friend where I've got some like things that are disappointing, those are all things that can be overcome. They're all things where like we can talk about it. It can get better. The person I know will be open to hearing about these things whenever we actually get a chance to talk about things, whatever. And then, there's also just other things that can get us to struggle with that transition from levels 1 to 3 in friendship is not actually investing in the friendship. So I mentioned not regularly seeing each other. And seeing each other, though, isn't the only way you invest, right? Like you can be physically next to each other and still not be investing in the friendship. So when I say investing, it means like actually being genuinely interested in connecting with each other. It's tough because this can often become one-sided in a lot of friendships. It is not that uncommon for one person to be more invested than the other. And it's the kind of thing that it will be more resilient a lot of the time if you're able to talk about that directly to a certain extent, right? And just be like, hey, I feel like I've been, say, putting in a lot of effort in this way, and I would love it. It could even be something like, I'm really glad I get to be here to help you all the time with your work stresses, and I love hearing your stories about work and getting to share in that with you. And I would like the opportunity sometimes to also be able to share about my stresses and get a similar level of attention. And but you could start by saying like, I feel like, there's a difference here. Well, I would recommend just using the dear man skill that we've talked about before. But that could be a thing that you head off early. Kettlestick, you said Sam really had a lot of books about how to be a pregnant right. And then all that nonsense about Eat the Rainbow went Uh, right out the window when she realized she could barely keep the rainbow down. Yeah, like there's a lot of pressure on people who are pregnant to have like a beautiful and perfect pregnancy and to have a beautiful labor and delivery experience. And like, there's even pressure on women or people who are pregnant to do things like only watch videos of people like having orgasmic childbirths, which is a thing. And like, don't watch anything that shows stressful childbirths ahead of going into labor. And it's like, yeah, that can help. But like, it's not somebody's fault if their experience of labor and delivery sucks ass, right? Like it's just not. And there's so much pressure um to just like min max every aspect of child things, like having babies at the perfect time, at the perfect age, and eating the right things, whatever, whatever. You know what? Our grandparents had kids until they were like in their 50s a lot of the time and did not have access to very balanced nutrition. And there was lead paint and lead gasoline everywhere. And yeah, there are a lot of really fucked up people in the world, but also, uh, it's whatever. It's whatever. We can chill a little bit, right? We can make ourselves really sick with putting a lot of pressure to do everything just right. Um, so yeah. Kettlestick, you said maybe that could help, but then if you're expecting a beautiful birth experience and then you end up with a horrible one, that's a big shock for sure. Rodden, there's a lot of pressure on women in general, so I imagine that it has increased a lot with pregnancy. Yeah, I mean, like, my dad's been pressuring me to have a baby since I was like 24. After I got divorced from my first husband, my dad was like, you could just get pregnant and have a kid on your own. And I was like, no, thank you. I would like to not be a single parent by choice. Like, more power to everybody who does it, but that is not how I want to do it. Does not sound good. Does not sound like how I want to live my life. And yeah, the pressure's only gotten worse over time. Yeah, I mean, my dad is really just like, but I don't want you to miss out on it if it's something you want to do. And I get that it's like, it's coming from a good and loving place. 100% it's coming from a good and loving place. And he just doesn't want me to experience a tragedy of like wanting to have a kid and not being able to. And thankfully, I am 100% ambivalent about whether or not I have children. I would be really jazzed to have them, but I'm also totally okay if I don't. All right, I'm gonna take my fishing rod, I think, and go do some fishing. Yeah, babies are expensive and a lot of work, 100%. Yeah. Oh, no, that's my pickaxe. Okay, so some other things that can make it harder is yeah, not investing in the friendship. So that means not actually really listening to the person, not responding to the emotional bids for connection. So, what are emotional bids for connection? That is different ways in which we indirectly indicate that we would like to connect with each other. And they're often missed. This is true in romantic relationships and also friendships. So, if I, for example, mention a few times that there is a concert for a band that I know we both really like coming up and that the tickets are really cheap, that is probably me on some level trying to suss out whether or not this person wants to go to the concert with me. And the thing is, though, it's like this might seem like people are just being very, neurotypical, unspoken social expectations, yada yada. But there is some of that. But there's also the fact that A lot of times people don't even realize that they want these things. A lot of this stuff is mediated very subconsciously. And people can get so scared of rejection that they really, really suppress a lot of their ability to connect with their not denial, desire for connection. I hope that makes sense. So people can really just be, and a lot of times people don't realize that they're doing it, right? But we can make different bids for connection. And it's like, the stereotype about the guy who's trying to play video games and his girlfriend, keeps coming in while he's playing video games. If she's only trying to get his attention when he's playing video games, obviously that's a thing, but probably she's not. It's just he recognizes it while he's playing video games. And that constantly rejecting those bids for connection will also atrophy the relationship. So it's not to say that every time you're playing video games and your partner suddenly wants your attention, that you should stop what you're doing and go and do whatever that is they're talking about. Sometimes they just want like 5 minutes of attention. Sometimes they just want you to like acknowledge them. I mean, think about it like the way your cat or dog does it. Sometimes the cat or dog comes over and like gets in your face because they just want you to acknowledge them and that they exist and like give them 5 seconds of your time. And that can often be enough. But then times when they want more, you don't want to constantly shoot that down. And I do suspect in a lot of those cases where people think that their partner is just sort of like weirdly jealous or disapproving of video games, though sometimes people genuinely are. I think that a lot of the time it's just that people don't recognize that the bids are happening at other moments, and it just seems more obvious to them in those moments. Yeah, Carlin, looking at kids are cool and all, but having a baby in this economy, I'm not looking super forward to having babies and like having to potty train and stuff, but like I think it's worth it for the relationship you get to have with your kids across the rest of their lifespan, especially when they become like teenagers and adults. Those are years I would really look forward to. And like the 3 to 7, I think is also pretty bitchin'. I really like kids hanging out with kids from ages not necessarily 3 and 4 are kind of hard, but like 4 to 5, their personalities I feel like really become a lot more distinguished, and they're a lot more curious and more able to like follow conversations and more able to like, coherently tell stories and everything. And it's just really great. They're just little dudes that'll hang out with you and be your buddy, and I love it. And I'm looking forward to that as well if we have kids. Where was I going with all of this? I really need to get like a little widget so whenever I lose my train of thought, I get the like loading dot circle thing that I can like push a little button for. I don't have one of those stream decks, but someday I will. And I'll be able to push it to indicate every time I've lost my train of thought, which is often. I'll be pushing it constantly. But yeah. Yeah, the major lifestyle change, Aradin, is one of those things that I think about a lot because I really do like my lifestyle, but also I think that I would get tired of being able to just kind of like party and club and go to festivals and travel and stuff anytime I wanted. Like, I don't think that could sustain me until I'm in my like 80s or 90s. And then Rodden, you said, Kit Kats are one of the things that the US version are far inferior to the Canadian versions. If you ever get a chance to try them, you should, or maybe not, as it might ruin them. And Kettlestick, you said, I'm sure many things in the US are inferior to things in other countries. Krellin, you suggested adopt a toddler, skip the diapers. adoption is more expensive than birth. Don't adopt if money's an issue. Yeah, I mean, there's also like a lot of really dark exploitative things about the adoption industry more broadly. And it is like an industry. But yeah, I'm not against the idea of adopting, but it's just how to do ethical adoptions is the question because there's a lot of babies that are adopted are not babies that the person like wanted to give up, for example. And it's that they like genuinely like the state is taking the kid from them and or like there's something that has gone really wrong or it's a situation where the person didn't want to be pregnant in the first place and was forced to stay pregnant and give birth. So there's like a lot of very exploitative things that kind of go into the whole thing, unfortunately. Um, but I am open to the idea of adopting, if that makes sense. But Austria will pay for your first 2 or 3 rounds of IVF, I think. So if like I was really having trouble for some reason having a baby, there's at least some support. Um, alrighty. So yeah, Tibron, you're right. Another thing to consider is that adopting an older child means that the child likely has a traumatic history and has mental health challenges because of it that you will need to be prepared for. And that's something that like I definitely would be prepared for, uh, but and willing to work with, but like it's also hard. Okay. So I think this is gonna be my last day. Um, because I've got this sinus infection. My throat is irritated and it's getting a little tired. However, we're going to talk more next week about ways that you shoot yourself in the foot towards making friends. I'm going to do some more funsy research. Oh yeah, one of the biggest ones obviously is violating people's boundaries. Like if you do something like start reading text messages over their shoulder or going through their shit or like just taking things, not necessarily stealing them, but just like feeling entitled to just like use whatever somebody has because you're like, well, fuck materialism or whatever. Like, yeah, sure, fight the power, but also like you got to respect people's boundaries and respect people for where they're at and all that shit. So we're not respecting. No worry, Valium. You are under no obligation to answer my questions. We're just here to chat and have a good time. We can also talk about it more next week if you want to, but only if you want to. Like you can always say no to answering my questions. Um, anyway, violating people's boundaries, not respecting a no, being really pushy. Some people, it depends on the culture, right? There are some cultures where it's very normal to like, you offer someone a piece of cake and they politely refuse, and that's the expectation that they're going to refuse, and that you got to encourage them a few times because that's the social norms of that country. And then there are other countries where it's the exact opposite. There's a really funny video on the internet on YouTube that's like just showing about like offering someone cake in Ireland versus Germany that really exemplifies this. I recommend checking it out if you don't quite know what I'm talking about. And these are both valid ways of doing things, but understanding what is and isn't the general expectations or the default consent framework, but then also getting to know that friend and like, are they comfortable with me really encouraging them? Right? Like if you have a friend who's, say, dealing with depression, it's good to know, do they want you to, generally speaking, come bust down the door to their house and like pull them into the shower and make sure they bathe and then get them some clothes on and drag them out the door to do something fun? Or are they the kind of person who just wants, and for whom that would be really positive, right? And really helpful? Or are they the kind of person who it's way better if you just like occasionally send some memes, maybe you pay for some takeout for them if they're having a really hard time feeding themselves, and you offer to come help clean up their place, Or maybe they're the kind of person who is just like, no, I just need you to be on standby mode for when I come out of this. That kind of thing is important to know, but that's more like stages 3 to 4 and like really deep long-term friendships. So you want to be careful not to violate people's boundaries. And if you realize you have, acknowledge it and give a genuine apology. All right, so let's go ahead and stop Stardew Valley for now. I want to just point out a couple of things on the interwebs. You'll have to give me a moment though to get it all up. I'm going to quit the game. And I just want to show you all that we've got some exciting things coming up on our website. So I'm going to go back to this and I'm going to go memes. This one here. Okay, so this is our website. If you don't know it, it's just consent.academy. And we have some upcoming workshops that I wanted to tell you about. We've got the Consent and Leadership Winter Series. It's not too late to sign up for that. We've got the Owning Your Power this Wednesday. You can take these classes individually if you want. Our accountability series is one that I'm really excited for. We're going to teach you about the basics of what an accountability process is, how to create accountability pods, and then dive into the nitty-gritty of accountability processes in part 3. And then this weekend, we have the trans, non-binary, and genderqueer discussion group. Our discussion groups are always free, that you can make a donation if you want. And the same goes for our consent basics classes. So we've got one on the 7th, and we've got, where's the other one? The 16th, right there. Then we've also got a class that's part of the Consent and Leadership Series, Bias and Awareness Gaps. Awareness gaps is what people would usually call something like blind spots, but we don't use that term because it is offensive to blind people. So, and it's like, I mean, it just like implies, there's a lot of language that we have that just implies that being blind is like negative and bad and less than. So we're going to change it to awareness gaps. We also have a men's discussion group. Charlie leads that if you're interested. And if you are a man, then you can come to it. We also have a great class series on supporting survivors of sexual trauma on the 21st. And then the women's discussion group on the 26th. So this is what we've got coming up for February. I'm going to have to be the person running the discussion group this Sunday. And so it starts right after, 1 hour after the stream starts on Sunday. I'm going to try to do the stream on Sunday and just end it at like 50 minutes or so, unless one of our volunteers can take the discussion group. But it seems like nobody's available, so I can do it. And then otherwise, I will see you Sunday and then again on Tuesday. It's been really lovely to hang out with you all. Thank you all for all the things you share and your ideas. And I'm looking forward to talking with you next week. Bye.